Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to today's webinar on obituaries. Tips for making sure you get the full benefit from an obituary notice. I'm excited to have Tom Kemp back with us, one of genealogy's experts on everything newspapers. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, host of the Legacy Family Tree webinars, broadcasting to you live once again from Surprise, Arizona, and today is another great day for genealogy. So as you know, this webinar is brought to you by the makers of the Legacy Family Tree software. Now, last week I showed you the new Census button here in the main toolbar. You can kind of see it here in the upper right. Just to its right is a Genealogy Bank button that I added to my toolbar yesterday, which will let you search all of the newspaper collections at Genealogy Bank. This, of course, is an optional button, but after listening to Tom's suggestions today, you might want to add it for quick reference. Just right-click on any button in your toolbar and drag it to the top. And if you haven't yet downloaded Legacy, give it a try for free or upgrade to the Deluxe Edition. So our main event today is, of course, Tom Kemp's Obituaries Clues to Look For. And immediately afterwards, I've got another fantastic lineup of door prizes to give away, including 2 one-year subscriptions to genealogybank.com, the Watch Jeff Live Adding an Obituary webinar CD, and Megan Smoleniak's newest book, Hey America, Your Roots Are Showing. We announced its arrival to our online store just yesterday, so it's brand new. To be eligible to win, all you have to do is be here, so don't go away. I'll also share a traditional 10% off coupon code with you, announce our next live webinars, and then take your additional questions for Tom. We're going to begin with a couple of poll questions. So, our first one, how often do you use newspapers in your genealogy research? So frequently, every once in a while, rarely, or never. So be honest here. There's not a wrong answer. Just these questions will help Tom get to know you a little bit better. And in just a couple of seconds, I'll close the polling and share the results with both you and with our speaker. Okay. So it looks like 40%, Tom, frequently, 40% every once in a while, 18% rarely, and 2% never. Well, let's hope to convince at least those 2% to switch today. So let's share our next one. As Tom does represent genealogybank.com, we're just wondering how many of your members are out there. So just yes or no, are you currently a member of genealogybank.com? Love their service. One of the things I love about what they do is they continue to add to it. I like reading about their updates. Okay, I'll close this. Looks like most of you have voted. And about 2/3 of you, let's hit the share button here on my end. 2/3 no and 1/3 yes. So welcome to all of you. Okay, you should see on my screen, if I've done everything right here, you should see Tom's picture there, speaking at the National Press Club. I'm pleased to be able to introduce Tom Kemp, who is a director of genealogy products at Newsbank, a well-known genealogist, library and speaker for over 30 years. He is also the author of more than 30 books. You know, Tom's book, called The International Vital Records Handbook, was one of the first books I learned about as a young student pursuing my degree in genealogy. I also had the opportunity to serve with Tom on the board of directors for the Utah Genealogical Association. Everyone who listens to Tom appreciates his energy and enthusiasm for genealogy, and he's just an overall great guy. So put your virtual hands together and let's give Tom a warm welcome. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
So glad to have you. Tom, I'll give you as much time as you can, so I'll just switch over to your screen, and when everything looks good here on my end, I'll give you the green light. And while you're doing that, Sherry's asking, what was the title of that Vital Records book again? It was the, am I right, Tom? The International Vital Records Handbook, is that?
That is correct. It's in its 5th edition now.
No, very
and
good.
quite pleased with it. And just to finish that thought, it tells you how to get a birth, marriage, death, or divorce record in all 50 states, all the provinces, every country in the world, and it actually has the form. So all you do is take the book, Xerox the page, fill it out, and then mail it off to India, Ireland, Kansas, whatever you need. Terrific stuff.
That's great. It is. Okay, Tom, your screen looks great. Time's all yours. Thanks again.
Welcome, everyone. As we move forward in this, if and as you have questions, I'd appreciate it if you would just send them in, and Jeff will alert me, and we can answer them as we go along so that you can get the most out of this. And I'm happy to hear from you after the show as well so that we can work with you. Obituaries are terrific things. I'm glad to hear that so many people are using newspapers. I've been at this almost 50 years. Many of you have been at it for decades as well. And it is true that so many of us didn't used to use newspapers as much as we do now because they were so darn inconvenient. And you had to make pilgrimages to libraries to get access to them. But now that so much of the content has gone online, it's nearly 6,000 papers on Genealogy Bank's site. There are other sites and individual newspapers that have put up their own back issues. And so it's becoming quite convenient, quite available. As you've used newspapers from early on in the colonial period, those newspapers were like one gigantic run-on sentence. And so you know what a difficulty those were. And so even if you were being very diligent and really searching closely, it would be easy for the mind to wander or fall asleep and that you might miss something. Computers have really made newspapers quite accessible today. And since they do record basically every day of the lives of our ancestors, it's a terrific source, terrific tool. So I want to launch into it, the basic demographics, so to speak, of Genealogy Bank. It's over 1 billion names now. In fact, next week, we will have crossed over 1,160,000,000 records. And that odd number is important because when Genealogy Bank launched 5-6 years ago, it only had 160 million items, which seemed at the time enormous. And now to have 1 billion more newspaper articles and the like, just an incredible day. It's all 50 states, 1600s to today. So let's get into it. There's just some examples of the variety of the newspapers. What you want to do, and I do want to orient you a little bit as we start, but just for 1 second, as you look at Genealogy Bank, there are multiple options for searching the newspapers, and I'd like to point this out to people. If you're looking for the old digital copies of the newspapers, it's here on the side labeled historical newspapers. And there are, millions and millions and millions of obituaries and all the articles in the old papers. It's every page, and you can search on every word. We've culled out just the obituaries in this section for the modern papers because there are so many people who are not doing this in a broad search the way a genealogist would, but they're looking just for the person who recently died, a relative of a colleague, that sort of thing, and they're just wanting to find that and get out. And so we tried to make this easier for people to work with, but because it's labeled obituaries, we do find that some people assume that's all the obituaries that are in Genealogy Bank. Not so. So I just want to point that out. So let's dig into the topic at hand. Newspapers were labeled in newspapers all different ways. Sometimes they call them obituaries, deaths. This is unusual, I think, to call it deaths record, but people gave it all types of headers. So you have to be flexible, and so sometimes if you're doing a search and you put in a person's name and you add as a search term, and we're so close to it, I'll just flip right back. If you were to put the name here and then put in the extra words box the word obituary, and it was in this newspaper, you might miss it because the text is death's record. So you're probably not going to anticipate the header, so don't try to include that. And we'll just get you to focus in on the person's name and dig into the paper. But I'll give you some more practical tips. First, I want to cover the value of an obituary itself. And what can you expect to find in your typical obituary? Well, the first name, full name, the names of all the relatives. Very, very handy. There's not too many sources that are going to outline so many relatives as we get in an obituary in this type of article. You'll get often the name of the cemetery where the person is going to be buried, the name of the clergy, and a critical piece of information, the denomination that's handling the funeral arrangements, a good indicator of what church the family likely attended, or surviving members of the family, that they have a connection to that denomination, so you can look for further information. So you're going to be reading this to see every clue for what it really can, direction it can point you in as you do further research. You get the obvious, the date, place, cause of death, very standard to include those in obituaries, and some are more detailed than others. You get very often the date and place of birth. Now, of course, an obituary is done at a time of trauma and a time where who's supplying the information, you're not necessarily sure, and sometimes people wish they could do a do-over and add more information or perhaps correct a fact here and there. But these are going to be terrific clues to you where you want to go to verify more of the information. A real terrific thing that people are including more and more in obituaries is the date and place of a marriage. And so this can be really one-stop shopping if you can get the birth date in place, the marriage date in place, as well as the death date in place. So a very compact, useful record. They very often include commentary about the individual, the occupation, the education, groups they may participate in. So it's just a terrific source. Taking an obituary, standard obituary that you would expect to see, here's one for James Edward Craig of Chester, South Carolina. It was published in the 1920s. And if you notice one thing here, just pointing this out, typically obituaries appear in a newspaper consistently on the same page. And so it is a good barometer, a good technique for you to zero in on a newspaper and find the ones that you're looking for. And you know by experience, oh, they're always on page 7, or it's always on page 3, or they put them on page 1. And so it'll vary from paper to paper, and it'll vary over the editorial life of the paper, whether they move it from one section to another. And of course, there is spillover where the obituaries are appearing on, in this case, page 13, but maybe there were quite a few people that passed away that week, that few days preceding, and so they had to have put them on other pages. But taking this one, let's just go through it line by line and really see what we've got here. So you have the name of the deceased. He's from Chester, South Carolina. He is the father of Arthur R. Craig of Charlotte. And you recall noticing this was the obituary that appeared in Charlotte, North Carolina, even though he died in South Carolina. So we're getting this extra coverage, if you will, in the North Carolina paper because he's the father of Arthur Craig, obviously the local resident. And he was a Civil War veteran, and he was 74 years old. Continue nicely that it gives us the full name, repeating the name of the son, this time giving us the son's middle name. And so that's really helpful there. Again, confirming he's of the city, tells us he died on a Friday at his home in Chester. So we can start getting the logistics of it, where he was at the time. Funeral service was held, so this is very much after the fact, at a Presbyterian church in Chester. Bingo. Great information. So we know that they were Presbyterians, or at least that the funeral was held there, and you're definitely going to want to then clue in on the records of that particular church, as well as the denomination. So you might be searching Presbyterian records in other cities where other family members are mentioned as living. And and see what more you could find. The interment was later at the family plot in Chester. So another huge piece of information. They actually had a family plot. He didn't just get a space at the cemetery to accommodate himself and perhaps his wife. There was a traditional family plot there, so that's a great indicator. There are more of the family members buried there, something you want to pursue. So you just start seeing all the clues just in the first opening paragraph of this obituary. As we move down, it repeats that he was 74 years of age. He was born in Fairfield County, South Carolina. Terrific information. We now have a place, and we can start digging for further information there, get his birth certificate, etc. He married to Miss Sarah J. I want to say that's Hicklin of York County. And so then you'll want to confirm what state is York County in. To them were born 11 children. Dynamite. We know that Arthur is one of them. And all of those children are living. Mr. Arthur Craig of this city is the second son. Okay, so we can start to space out the 11 children. We know there's at least an additional son born before. He was one of the prominent men of his section where he lived. He was a Confederate veteran. Okay, so we're starting to see a frame for his life. He entered the Army in his native state, so again, that would be South Carolina. Fought through the 4 years of the war, so we can get a sense of, okay, he was at it for quite a while. You know, he didn't enter at the end, etc. He was not just any member of the Presbyterian Church there, he was a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church for many years. Okay, bingo. That is huge. We know that every church event is going to be recorded there, the baptisms, the burials, the marriages. He's going to be reflected in the minutes. If he is so active in the church, chances are his family is. And so this is going to be a really good indicator that you want to pursue beyond. When you contact a church, it's so common that we'll stop it saying, do you have a baptismal record? Yes, we do. Here it is. And you want to make sure that you extend that search through the other records of the church, but especially through the minute books. See if there's a history of the church. Have they published a centennial picture album? Very, very common. Now, he's dying in 1920, but there may have been historical photographs. There may have been a looking back at 100 years of the church type volume, 150 years. And so you want to see if there were illustrations that might be identified, and bingo, then you have a copy of his photograph. So this is a terrific clue and a terrific place you're going to look. And he's more likely to have been in a book like that because he was so engaged and so involved in the life of the church. Goes on to continue that Presbyterian theme by saying he was of Scotch-Irish stock, which settled the section of North Carolina and Upper South Carolina. Let's see. Refers to the grandfather was a patriot in the Revolutionary Army. Absolutely goldmine. Now you've got the family living there for multiple generations. He fought in not just the Civil War, but the grandfather is in the Revolutionary War. You're going to want to zero in and look for his records. The clues are just pouring out of this obituary. This is absolutely terrific. And the fact that they're referencing it to the extended Scotch-Irish community there is a good indicator that he was involved in their events as well. So you're going to want to look into the social groups for that ethnic persuasion, so to speak. He was among the most esteemed citizens of Upper South Carolina. And so it gives you a section of the state to look at. Survived by his wife. There are 11 children and 4 grandchildren. The children are, and then it starts to name them. J.H. Craig of Chattanooga, so now you've got a location. Miss Margaret Craig of Cardenas, Cuba. So there's that's a terrific piece of information where she is a missionary of the Southern Presbyterian Church. So again, reaffirmation that the family is deeply involved in the church, very integrally involved, not just simply attending on Sunday or nominally a member. They're into it full force, and the daughter carried along that enthusiasm, that excitement, and that interest, and she's serving as a missionary in Cuba. No doubt there were application forms, there are notices in the paper, there were write-ups or reports. There's probably a huge wealth of information that's kept in the archives of the Presbyterian Church that you'd want to check and get more information on. Perhaps photographs survive for her as well. They mention again Arthur R., and then you sort of say to yourself, I wonder if these kids are coming in order. J.H. being presumably a son, and because then the next person is a named individual, and they add the word Miss, and then comes Arthur, and if he was the second son, that's sort of fitting. So you keep that in order. That's a good clue. And you see if this is giving you the birth order of the kids as well, giving his address, S. Douglas Craig, and then he's of Winston-Salem, so you have another location to go to look for him. Miss, again, being denoted for Rebecca. She's in Spartanburg, South Carolina. S.L. Craig of Atlanta, J.E. Craig of Charleston, West Virginia, etc. And what's interesting to me is all the women are sort of identified clearly. And so I'm going to assume that this first person is probably a man. And but all of them are laid out. We know that all of the kids were alive, still alive, and now we know where they dispersed throughout the South, or in the daughter's case, serving off in Cuba. We also know that it said, and there were 4 grandchildren. So someone here is married. All the women are identified as Miss. So I think that's probably not coming in that direction. I think it's probably going to be children of one of the sons, and so we want to see if they're mentioned or listed. And bingo, I guess we're at the end of that obituary, and so we don't have any further clues. But there's a lot to go on just from that brief obituary. So this is terrific. If you were looking for his obituary in the Chester area in South Carolina, you may have missed it. Perhaps it's in another paper, but the fact that it was picked up in a North Carolina paper where the son was living, and notice the other children, none of them were living in, let's see, what town was this? I've forgotten already. Charlotte. And so this is terrific that you could find this. So you want to consider an obituary could appear in multiple papers depending on where a person had lived their life or where it would be of interest to the survivors of that individual. And so we'll look at that and look at some other examples, and I'll point that out as we go through this. So other basic clues that you get, just like you did in this previous obituary that told us where the person was born, these can be terrific clues in some of the newspapers. This happens to be in 1893, New Orleans, Times-Picayune. And so here you have Robert Moore, gave us his birth date, the date of his death, and the time, interestingly enough, tells you that he was a native of Ballyconnell in County Cavan, Ireland, that he'd been a resident of the city for the past 50 years. When they do talk in terms of 50 years, 60 years, sometimes it's a round number, and so they may be rounding it off. This person is Irish, and I do know when you use Irish death records, they do tend to give the ages in breaks of 5 years. He was 60, 65, 70, 75. You don't get people so often that are named as he was 92. And you also see a phenomenon in Ireland where if a person is listed as being, reasonably old, say he was 50s and 60s, or and then it jumps into he was 85, he was 90, which I took to mean more as he's really old and sort of scaling up. And so you'll want to weigh it and you'll want to look at it. In this case here from the New Orleans paper, you would get the clue also not only where to look for when the person may have immigrated over to America, or at least to that city. So another indicator to look for his naturalization papers in Louisiana, and just give that as a clue. But we'd see here that he was Presbyterian, at least the funeral's being held there, and coming from County Cavan does put him in some of the early Ulster counties, even though Cavan is in the south and remained as a part of the nation of Ireland after partition. In this case, this happens to be another one from County Cavan. It's from the San Francisco paper. It begins by saying the person's 104 years old. This was an obituary from the Philadelphia Ledger. So newspapers will pick up an obituary because I suspect in this case it was not just from the interest that somebody would know her or her family was here, as in the case of the family being from Chester, South Carolina, but it appeared in the Charlotte, North Carolina paper because the family was there. This one probably was picked up from human interest that she was over 100 years old. But it gives the terrific information of where she passed away in media outside of Philadelphia on October 3rd, her name, the advanced age, and so many months, so you can calculate that back and find out her age. She was born near Coot Hill, a section of County Cavan, and the exact date of birth. She came to this country in 1840. How cool is that, to get the exact date? And that it was through the port of Philadelphia. Lived there for many, many years, it said, subsequently resided there. She had 7 children, 24 grandchildren, belonged to a family that was tended to live long, long-lived family, and her aunt having just died in Ireland at the age of 108. So it would be a terrific clue. Zero in, I would say, if you have someone who just or recently died in Ireland at the age of 108, it might be possible to search for the deaths in the 1870s, see if you find somebody that's dying at such an advanced age. That would be very unusual. And I would start with County Cavan, perhaps the counties just around it. And since it is Cavan, I would take the counties around it, but going north as opposed to the counties to the south, so that you're likely to snag this person. And since it's an aunt, we don't know if it's an aunt that carried the name Riley or was of a different surname. But that would be a terrific way to extend the family, because you've got this clue that you can operate from. So don't discard anything. Take advantage of every opportunity. I like to point out that in every town there are newspapers published in multiple languages. Quite common, especially when you get to the Southwest. And here's one, Continental, published in El Paso, Texas. This is 1959. But notice that this obituary, or defunciones as they're calling it here, is for a Richard Smith, 46 years old, and he was resident, etc. It talks about all the details. And it's appearing in that paper because it's of interest to the local readers. Now, it might be that he's actually of Hispanic, or in this case likely Mexican origin, or perhaps his wife was. It's very possible, but it could be that he was just someone who interacted in the community, and that the editor of the paper knew that this obituary would be of high interest to the readers. The goal of the newspaper editor is to sell newspapers, and so they're going to pull in the articles that are going to attract the reader and keep their interest and keep the sales. The other thing you're going to have to be concerned is not just that it might be appearing in a different language. It might be in English, but still look like a different language. And the style of our handwriting, the syntax that we use in normal speech or in the formal speech of obituaries and in writing has really changed significantly. So here's an obituary that appeared in the Boston Newsletter one of the earliest newspapers in the country back in 1705. So the country wasn't even 100 years old yet, or the settlement of the country. And in this case, you have a person who dies in Barnstable. Now notice the flexibility in the spelling here. You do get, just as we see in written English of the day, the initial S that is shaped more like an F. And so we have Barnstable, B-A-R-N-S-T-A-B, only that looks awfully funny like a P. And so you're going to have to be flexible with that. And if any of you have set type, if I can see by a show of hands, okay, I can't see your hands, but that's fine. I set type when I was a kid. And you get to know what it was like. And you could pull type rapidly from the tray, multiple trays, because you're probably using different fonts and sizes. And you'd have to set it upside down and backwards, and it all had to fit on the line. And maybe you ran out of B's, maybe you ran out of P's, maybe you ran out of N's and W's and L's and 1's, and so many things that could be flipped around and repurposed. And then you would, when you broke up the piece of type that you had set, you would then redistribute the type back into its proper spots. But the eye could read this. The person of the day who is reading it, even us today, as we look at this, we can read this, we can understand this. But keep in mind, a computer may stumble on something like this. You may type in and say Barnstable, they're not seeing it with a P. Now, we've taught our computers at Genealogy Bank to read the S for that F-looking character, and so that's not so much of the problem. But when it's flat out a different letter, like a B and a P, or the B, the B part of the letter is missing, perhaps, it'd be very difficult for a computer to compensate and to read that. But it does give us the date of the death. And it was on Monday the 16th, current, meaning the most recent 16th of the month. And he died with a Y, suddenly, again, that FS situation here. Here, I think in this case, would refer to Boston, though it could refer to Barnstable, and you'd have to sort of examine other articles to sort of hear their voice and know how they would refer to that. Person's name, Thomas Hinckley. I'm going to say that's Esquire, and even though it's G and instead of a Q, let's say, but formerly governor with, unique spelling too. Governor, let's see, governor with a U of Plymouth Colony, and we've all seen Plymouth written this way with an I and with a more commonly expected Y. And his age, about 86 years. Absolutely stunning, absolutely terrific. I mean, for us to go back and to find this at a time when a death record might just simply say Hinckley, Thomas, and a date, died, or it just might say Mr. Hinckley or something. So the handwritten records in the vital registers of the day could be very, very brief, and so to get more information from a newspaper, absolutely golden. The same thing is true even as we get a little bit later in the time. Here you have from 1822, we're still dealing with the syntax of the day in Gloucester, and in this case it's Gloucester, Rhode Island, and you may have to check around with that. It'd be very easy to think it's Massachusetts, but as I did some little research on this one, it was in Massachusetts. On the 11th instant, so here you have a newspaper published on the 18th of September, instant again, just like the word current in the previous obituary, pointing you back at the most recent occurrence of that date. So on the 11th of September, 1822, Mrs. Sarah Wade died. She was the consort, or the wife of. Sounds quite odd way to say it, but you see that starting to appear in the old style. That was the old customary way of saying it. Husband's name, Charles Wade. And she was the only daughter of Mr. Jonathan Pray. of Foster. Again, there's a lot of towns named Foster running around New England, but you'll see it's Rhode Island. She has left a disconsolate husband and 4 children to mourn their irreparable loss. So it's a terrific, little heart tug of an obituary here. Her funeral was attended on the 13th instant, just 2 days after her death, which proceeded from her father's house in Foster, when a suitable discourse was delivered by the Reverend Joseph White. And so then you'd want to track him down and say, did a copy of the sermon survive? Genealogy Bank happens to have in the historical documents quite a few funeral sermons, but they do survive. And they were distributed to the attendees, the people, the family, the friends of the family. It was a customary thing to produce. They were published usually by your local newspaper, who printed other things besides the newspaper, and they print a little booklet of the funeral sermon. There's millions of these that survive, but of each copy, like hers, there may be only 1, 2, 3 copies that survive to modern times. So you're going to have to really comb the earth to find that. A good place to start would be in Genealogy Bank itself. And I will add, too, you may say, well, a funeral sermon from those days, I'm not sure I want to hear it. You can get some funeral sermons from the 1700s, the 1800s, which are so moving, so really, truly spiritual, comforting for a time like a funeral, that it's astonishing. And then you do get some which might be more like what you might expect, that are fire-breathing, fire and damnation and all of this kind of stuff, and you just wonder if that was much comfort to one and all. But it certainly was the style of the day, and certainly in the context. And there you have 8, 10, 12, 30-page sermon that was given for your ancestor at the time. I mean, when you're scraping through records and you're hard-pressed to find anything that mentions your family, to find the funeral sermons given at their funerals, that is truly astonishing. And so you get a good sense of it from the newspaper, and here you have a minister to focus on. I'll give you a search tip there, another clue, so to speak. Most libraries that kept funeral sermons, and they are the old venerable type libraries that have been around several hundred years, they typically catalog them very briefly as sermons and the name of the minister. So they very often do not catalog them by the name of the deceased. So you wouldn't go to a card catalog. You could and look for Sarah Wade or Mrs. Charles Wade. You're going to be looking for Joseph White, the minister. So you might want to do the homework and figure out what denomination was he a member of. Could be a good indicator that his sermons would have been collected by a university attached to that denomination, Congregational Baptist, Episcopal, what have you. It certainly could have wound up in a Brown University in Rhode Island, or other large, the Athenaeum there in Providence. So you really want to start looking for that. That would be a great keepsake to have. I was just pointing out here that you would want to look in the Perpetual Calendar. This is a Perpetual Calendar for 1822, and when it refers to the 11th instant and the 13th instant, and we know the calendar on the 18th, so we know that the newspaper is being published on a Wednesday. She died on the previous Wednesday. The funeral was on the Friday, etc. And so we can get those dates in our mind, and for the days of the week, and sort of see the pattern of how these things move forward back in the 1820s. Another feature that you look for in an obituary is the extraneous notes that are added by the editor. So here you have one telling us that this person died in St. Louis, gives the date, gives the age, and then adds the little reference, hey, Indianapolis papers, please copy. Now, it's not like this was a telegraph, or it's, that this came in on a ticker tape so that the newspaper editor would expect it. But a little courtesy among editors was in play here. And so if they knew they had something, they would forward it to the good guys in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis would show the courtesy back when they had obituaries or other items of news and call it to the attention of the editors, because one thing happened every day. They had their customary 4 pages, 6 pages, 100 pages, whatever, and they had to fill those pages every day. So a little help here. I'm not selling newspapers that are in competition to your market, but I'm helping you in your market, you're helping me in my market. And so, but for a genealogist, that's a huge clue, because you know immediately somebody is living in Indianapolis that wanted to know about his death. Had he been born there? Is that where the rest of the family lived? Was his business partner there? What was the connection? But there was a connection compelling enough that the newspaper editor wanted to call it out. And this was quite common. Here's one that appeared, and this is a death, and it's saying, hey, the good folks in Rochester, New York ought to know about it. These ones in Montreal, Canada need to know about it. So they were sending that heads up in multiple directions. Very, very common, but an absolute killer clue that you want to take up on, because it just tells you, it just screams out to you, someone of immediate interest in the family wanted to know about this.
Hey, Tom, Mary's asking a question about this. She's saying that she has someone who died in New York about 1870, and then it says, California papers, please copy. So she's saying California is a big state. How does she know where to look, and how far beyond the date would you expect to find it?
It would tell me that somebody is in California right now. That maybe if this person is dying, they're 80 years old, maybe it's their children that have all moved to California. Chances are if they're in New York, it wasn't vice versa, but it's people who moved to California. And that, if it was the 1870s, had they gone out in the gold rush many years earlier, after the war, people tended to move around the country, just as they did after World War I, just as they did after World War II. And so people were out there, they were alerting them. California meant San Francisco or LA. There's thousands of cities there now, but that's what it meant in those days. And it could have been a wide circle around those areas. I think you'd want to zero in on the surname. You know that the person was probably born in New York, and see. And be aware there's a lot of California birth, marriage, death records, particularly the death indexes that went up. And that would be a good way to zero in on them. But I would take the California papers in Genealogy Bank, for example, and I would look, let's just say this one said Rochester, New York, said California. I would then look for people named Rice and Walt, let's see, residents of his brother-in-law. No, so this was the person named Rice, and I would look in and zero in on that person to see. It's an uncommon surname, and see if you could find something by linking that with the name and an obituary. Does that help, Mary?
Yes, and Mary says, how long after the death should she look? Should she be looking for several months? Will the newspaper usually copy it immediately, or what's the general time frame?
Oh, I see. I'm sure it's weeks later, because they had to get the message. Now, it's possible they could have used the telegraph as we get to later in the time period, and then the trains are connected, but otherwise the connectivity between those two areas could be several months. And that's another real big clue. People sometimes look in just the week after a death. The most common thing people do who haven't really thought this through, they'll search the newspaper on the day a person died and then say, how come I'm not finding him? Because the obituary doesn't appear for 2 or 3 days later, even for somebody who dies today. But in the old days, very common for an obituary to appear 2 to 3 weeks after the fact. But I would say for a newspaper on the other side of the country to pick it up, you're easily talking 3 or 4 weeks, a month or two.
And Maggie asked a follow-up question. Do they copy the complete obituary, or do they just put in a little blurb of it? What's your experience with that?
I think it's probably going to be just like the case of the good family that was in Chester, South Carolina, but appearing in the Charlotte paper. You got a lot of coverage because the son is living there. And when the newspaper editor gets this, he may know what the family is, because they know everybody in town. It's not like today. And they would know most of the people in the town and say, oh, terrible news, your dad died, or your grandfather, or whatever. And they may add, oh, and here's what he did, and he was in the Civil War, and he did this, he did that. And so you might get a few more items. You absolutely want to get every version of an obituary. People sometimes point out to us, hey, you say you got bazillions of obituaries, but I found 3 on my guy. What's with that? Are you triple counting? And the answer is, well, not exactly. We take every newspaper and every obituary. So if it appeared 3 times, yep, that's 3 of them. But you want to look, because sometimes the initial obituary will run, but by the 3rd insertion in the paper, they've corrected an error or added some more details. And so I definitely track it down, let the computer do the searching for you. And if you're not finding it there, I go to the census and try to look for people of that surname who are living in either the named community or the surrounding towns. Notice if it said she was from Philadelphia, but she really lived in Media, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb. And so you want to zero in on it. Nobody ever heard of Media, shall we say, but Philadelphia they would instantly recognize and picture in their minds. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let me give you some typical searches. When you open up Genealogy Bank, you do want to click on the section for historical newspapers and zero in more deeply to the area. Perhaps you know the people lived, and maybe by that clue, you know they lived in California, let's say, and they lived in New York, and you click those 2 states and then search. Once you've done that initial search, you'll notice that on the side there are subject headings to categorize the articles. And so you'd want to click on the obituaries. And so you have all of these categories, and then you would be able to, if you were searching in this example on the screen, somebody of the Juno family, you would pull out just the obituaries and get them all here in a row, or just the articles about the family, as the case may be. And so you can fine-tune it and cut through all of, because you get hundreds of responses. Let's say you can take them in little chunks that are easier to deal with. In this case, a Clapper example, and you can click on obituary and search just, does that say 66 obituaries? A lot easier than wading through the 11,000 references to the surname that are in newspapers all over the country. Again, you could fine-tune that by picking, give me just one state. But don't forget, as in that initial example, he was from South Carolina, died in South Carolina. He born, married, and died there. But the son was in North Carolina. That's where we got the deep, lengthy obituary with so many details. It's again just pointing out that once you fine-tune it to searching just the obituaries, you get a smaller, more manageable number that you can search through. I do want to point out, as we did say in passing, newspaper editors sometimes edited, they always edited what they were doing, but they sometimes abbreviated. And so in this case, this obituary, for whatever reason, when they set the type for all these dozen individuals or so, there were 4 of them named William, and every single one they put in as WM. So that's a key thing you want to search for. And if you're looking for a name and you're not finding it, you're saying, gee, I'm reasonably certain there should be an obituary. If the name is William, put in WM. See if that gives you a different set of search results that gets you closer to your target. But it's so common, and I just wanted to point that out. Other things that, got to go in the correct direction. Other things I want to point out are that when you use the search box, don't overfill it. You want, if you're not finding it in your first search, and you say, well, I put in his first name, his middle name, his last name, you probably put in too much. And just like the example that I just showed you, where they they just kept it brief. W.M. Wilson. They didn't include his middle name. They didn't include a lot of details. So if you include a lot of details, you probably guarantee that you're not going to find them. But there are some clues that do tend to work. And one of them can be put in the last name and put in a place that they lived or a term associated with them. That could be the name of the school they attended. You have to sit back and strategize, okay, what would they have said about him? I'm not finding the obituary in my first search, or it's such a common name, I'd like to cut through them. And you might say, okay, went to Yale. Oh, boy, put in Yale. Chances are that's going to get mentioned in an obituary. Or the person was associated with a town, and it's a unique name, and he was from Orlando, Florida. That just doesn't come up a lot as a location, and so you can put that in. Maybe it's Muncie, Indiana, whatever it is, and you plug it in, but you start to think of what words will narrow down the search results and probably narrow it down that you get your guide. So you're strategizing against the index. So, and in terms of date, again, I mentioned it's very common for people to say, oh, the date, and they put in the date of death. But that's not, this is going to tell you the date of the newspaper they're going to search. Another thing people say is, oh, I know he died in 1854. Well, you probably don't know that. And you think it, you're pretty sure that's it, but give it a little latitude, because if he died December 28th, 1854, the obituaries are going to appear in 1855 newspapers, if you see what I'm saying. And if they're getting the message from New York out to California and it's 2 or 3 months later, it's definitely going to be well into the next year. So don't limit it too much. You can use the dates to your advantage. You can put in just May 1854 because you think it ought to have appeared then, but under the rule of thumb that it might appear several weeks after the fact, put in June, put in July, and do 3 separate searches. That way you limit the search results to a small enough bucket that you can say, okay, I can sort through 14 hits, and then I'll just dip in the bucket again and try it again. And so you'll find that this can go quite quickly for you. Really a good technique to use. So I'm going to give you an example here. If you were searching for a recent obituary, this was an actual search I did. Her name was Grace Toms. I knew she'd married a guy named Stewart. She was born, married in Stamford, Connecticut, and reasonably expected her to find her in Connecticut. And she was born in 1896, and everybody else in the family lived and died right there in and around Stamford. So a search result for Grace Stewart, boom, 3,500 hits. Okay, that's a lot. We're going to have to narrow this down. So we did just the more recent obituaries, cut out all the ones, even though she's born in the 1890s, we cut out all the old ones, assuming she lived to a ripe old age, and so we're just going to check the more recent obituaries. 167, that's still searchable, sortable, but we thought we'd cut it down a little bit more, maybe zero in on just Connecticut. Nobody in Connecticut. Okay, so maybe she moved. Did a search for her husband, got over 700. One for Connecticut, but that wasn't him. And so then I put in her name, but added just the word Stanford. Why Stanford? Yes, there's a Stanford, Texas. Yes, there's one in Illinois. There's one in New York. There's, one in England. But it's not a word that comes up a lot. And so by putting it in the obituary, that might be a good way to cut through a billion obituaries and articles. And bingo, there she was. And in this case, we found out that she was living down in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. She was a municipal court judge. She'd done pretty well by herself. And it talks about her being a native of Stamford. So her name, without the middle name, because you never know how they're going to render it, and the word Stanford was enough to pull it up and zero right in on her obituary. And so we got her age, what she died of, the date, where she was, Rockville, Maryland, native of Stamford. Husband Charles died in 1920. Okay, so that's why we're not finding him. He died much earlier on. We weren't really focused back in that period. And here she was in the Washington Post in 1992. So you want to use some strategy with it, and don't just assume. It's very easy to get slogging in this and become annoyed. Step back, take a deep breath, and say, okay, I know it's in here. How am I supposed to find it and coax it? So we want to work with the search engine and dig it out. We told you about the practical tip of the William. And I want you to look at this for a second. You may have seen this. It makes its rounds on the internet every once in a while. But it's an interesting phenomenon, as this says, that even though this is spelled horribly, you can read this. And it's because in English we hear the first and the last sound of a word, or visually we see the beginning and the end letter. And so that is critical. And it really comes home to you if you speak with people who come from other countries. I know that Chinese do not tend to pronounce the last syllable with as much emphasis. My wife is Chinese, and in the beginning it was awfully hard for people to understand. And I used to say, no, honey, you have to finish the thought. You have to say that or whatever that last sound is, because that's what's going to convey the message that it's past tense, future tense, and that sort of thing. And if you think about it, it's kind of fascinating. This I find amazing, that you can read it quite comfortably, and no matter what the order of the letters is. Newspapers over the last 300 years, the editors were counting on that. That's why they would produce articles where they left letters out. They put in substitute letters. No one had a problem reading the paper, or they would find it funny, and after reading it a second or two, they'd get it and they'd move right on. Computers aren't so lucky, and they don't necessarily see these things that are natural to our eyes. We work on this constantly to improve the indexing, the OCR, coaxing the bulk of this out, and we have people who look at it. We try to find ways, but it's an art on top of the science, if you will. Another real great tip, if you see right there on the front page in Genealogy Bank and other newspaper sites, there's going to be a list of, hey, what newspapers do you have anyway? Click on the title list. It'll tell you exactly what paper's there. In Genealogy Bank, you can search the papers and not be a member and see the results. So that's a question that comes up a lot. Hey, can I see what's in there before I? Yes, you can. And you get a little slice of the paper, and it gives you sort of like an inch of the paper where that word that you were searching on, their last name or the term, and you can zero right in on it. And you can come to the title list, and you can click on any one of these hyperlinks and go right to that paper. And you might say, oh my golly, I can't believe it, you have the American Herald from Worcester. Yes, we do. That's what I need to search. You click on it and search only that paper. And you could bookmark that and get only the obituaries from that paper. Or you could pick just the obituaries from Worcester. So you could click on just that. It would pull you up all the newspapers from Worcester, and then you could search, give me all the papers in Worcester. I want to search all of them, but I don't want to search everybody else. Yes, it could have appeared in newspapers all around the state or other states, but for my initial search, I want to search only Worcester. And so you can take this any way you want to. So just know that that's available to you. And but it's huge. There's over 1 billion names. We add 10 records every second. So the pace of this is enormous. If you didn't find it when you searched, wait an hour and search again. It's absolutely astonishing. When I first looked at newspapers, I was shocked to find a relative. I assumed we were just nobodies, and we would never be famous enough to be in the paper. But that's the beauty of it. The editor wanted to sell the paper to the regular person. And so they included as many articles about children and marriages and obituaries and everything about the lives that our ancestors lived, and wrapped it up and put it in the paper. It's an incredible day for genealogy. We've just never had this level of access. And to make it even easier for you, there's a special offer when you go after Genealogy Bank if you want to subscribe. At a terrific price. It's just not available elsewhere. I've never seen it at this price. And so this is a good thing to snap it up. And it's only going to be out there until the end of the month, till the 30th of the month. And so you have a few more days to take advantage of it. But do dial it in or click and do it online. I'd be open to answering any questions that you have.
Okay, Tom, from everybody out there around the world, let's give him a virtual clap or applause. A lot different doing these
Yay!
classes this way, I know. I wanted to a couple times open my mic so you could hear me chuckling at the things that you're saying. I love it. Well, Tom, let's do this really quickly. Right, I've put in your webinar control panels. I've pasted this link there, so you can just click on it. A couple of questions, and then I'm going to switch over to my screen here. Peggy is wondering, how does Genealogy Bank differ from other sites? Maybe do you have additional content? Is the content at Genealogy Bank, is it unique to Genealogy Bank?
That's a terrific question, Peggy. The easiest answer is it's almost all unique to Genealogy Bank. Something on the order of 95% of all the newspapers
that's what
are
I've
not
heard.
on any other site. So you might find another site and says, oh, well, they have newspapers. Sure they do. Knock yourself out and use those papers, but they won't have the 6,000 papers, give or take, that are on the Genealogy Bank site.
Yeah.
There's a small overlap of about 5%. And then when it comes to the other buckets or categories on the Genealogy Bank page, those historical documents where you'll find those funeral sermons, they're not on anybody else's site. If you look at the serial set and the American State Papers, other people have some of it. We're the site that you'll go to if you want to see all of it. Every single one, including the serial set maps, which are just not available anywhere else, and those are spectacular. You'll get them in Genealogy Bank. You will not find them anywhere else. And those are packed with millions more obituaries. The serial set has the complete back set of the American U.S. Army Register, the Navy Register. This goes back into the early 1800s. Lists everybody that died every year, whether it was a war or whether they died in a truck accident in Kansas. And it also captures military people who died after they retired. And so it tracks officers all their lives, and that comes right up until the 1970s or so. And there's one for the Air Force. So it's terrific content, but in terms of your basic question, no one has as many newspapers as we do. We are the largest site, and they don't have the same newspaper titles, if you will, the same exact newspapers.
Okay, thank you. Very well answered. Lots of people are asking a question similar to this. What % of available newspapers have been digitized? So, Tom, let's just say there's 1,000 newspapers ever in the world. What is Genealogy Bank's goal? Are we hoping to get all 1,000 of them, or where are we at?
Yes. I don't know where. That's a great question. I'm going to have to find that. We are probably well over half, and we're definitely working on getting the other half. Let me put it to you this way. There are 6,000 titles already live, and that's just a rough number because it's 5,800 and something. We add anywhere from 30 to 100 new titles a month. We also fill in missing issues and add more content to several thousand newspapers every single month. So we will not put up a title until we have the bulk of it,
okay,
because we want to give you enough to digest. But then there's always going to be, but they didn't have the month of June, or they're missing February 3rd issue or whatever. So we keep tracking that down, and every month you'll see we add. We'll put up a list of, 100, 150 newspaper titles that we've added to, but in reality, we've added to more than 2,000 titles every single month. It's that rate of production. We are also digitizing papers from around the world.
Oh,
so we're doing this not just for the U.S., but for
tell us
other
about
countries.
this. Yeah.
I don't want to get your hopes up unduly. While we're working on it, it is not in Genealogy Bank. So only U.S. newspapers at this point, but it is something we're working on, and we have fond hopes of including down the road sometime, maybe 5 years from now. But we have to get enough bulk before we can add it. But let me tell you something exciting I just found. There's a newspaper from New York City that we recently added called the Irish Nation. Now this newspaper was so gung-ho for Ireland and wanted to share information with their local residents. They included all the deaths in Ireland in the paper.
Wow.
All the marriages in Ireland. Now it says all. I'm sure they missed a few, but there they are, pages and pages and pages of the births, of the marriages and deaths. There's pages and pages of every ship that came into New York City with Irish. They interviewed every Irish person getting off the boat. What was their name? What was their age? Where were they from? Where were they going? And what fascinated me is that's information that's not on the passenger list manifest kept by the federal government. So I'm wondering how many reporters did they have at the docks, because they might have 17 ships arriving in just one day, and tomorrow they have another 17 ships. I mean, you get in, that comes up to the 1911, 1914, somewhere in that area. Starts in the 1840s, goes up to about, I'm going to say 1914. And that's coverage from before there's Irish civil registration available.
Oh.
That's incredible.
It is.
And it covers a period where the Irish civil registration was lost and destroyed. So to have it appearing in a New York City newspaper, unbelievable. It's huge, and you can search for it by just looking on your person's name.
Wow.
So if you know when a person came over, and you say, well, gee, it should have been en route the following year, you can find it. And it's terrific stuff. Terrific stuff. And it's every day is Christmas because they add so much every day.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
To give you an example, we added 20 million records so far this month, and the month is not over. And so that's just 20 million or more records in 1 month. And like I say, it's 10 records a second. So even
Tom,
when we're sleeping, they're adding records.
Yeah, Mary and others are asking this then. How do you select the newspapers to add to your collections? And then if I have a suggestion, can you go and digitize my newspaper? How do you do that?
Yes. Please send in your suggestions. The squeaky wheels do get the grease, so to speak.
Okay.
And it's just a question of, just like a newspaper editor wants to supply the news to the residents so they'll buy the paper, we want to supply the papers that our readers want so that they'll stick with it, because it's by having everybody pitch in and join that we can afford to do this. The reality is also we sign contracts with newspaper chains, and so if all of a sudden, I'll just say Hearst, but it's not one, but let's just say we sign a contract, they'll all of a sudden want their 200 newspapers to be done right away.
Okay.
The other thing that comes in, let's say you send in a suggestion, oh, I've got to get the Stanford Advocate or whatever the title is. Great. Then we have to go and look, send out our people, where is it? Where are the back issues? Oh, there was a flood. Oh, there was a fire. Oh, the newspaper doesn't have their back issues. And so we have to track down, where are the back issues? Are they in decent shape? Did they survive well? And so we have to get that. It takes time to organize them, track down the missing issues. You may say, oh, I know they're all here. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Or maybe where they are, those people don't want us to do it. There may be a newspaper that's still publishing their newspaper, and they may say, we may want to do this ourselves sometime. I think we we're not sure what we want to do, so let's not do our paper yet. And so they may say, okay, we'll work with you, we'll wait, maybe we do it next year, when you're ready, when you're comfortable. And so it takes a little negotiation, a lot of finding, just like genealogy. When we go out, we travel, we have people all over the country, all over the world that are working on this. And you know, Newsbank has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of employees that do nothing but make this happen.
Oh, that's an exciting time.
Just astonishing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, what else would we like to know?
So Pam is asking, and I really want to know this too, is there a way to be notified when Genealogy Bank adds new states or new newspapers? Like I want my own personal watch list. You know, can I be notified when you add something?
Absolutely. Everybody can. Send us your email. Go to the website, genealogybank.com. Click to receive the newsletter.
Okay.
Visit our Facebook page. Click to receive the newsletter. We post right on Facebook, hey, we just added this, that, and the other, and we'll do little articles about it and show you examples from the paper. And we're selecting from the newspapers. But on the master list, on the front page of the newspaper, in the lower left-hand column, lower left-hand part of the homepage, there's a little part that says, what's new? And it will list, boom, the 150 largest chunks of newspapers that we added, all of the new titles that have been added, and the ones that we've added the most back issues to, I'll say it that way. And a handy feature, when you do a search, there is a box there that lets you search, hey, I only want to search newspapers you added in the last 30 days.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or you could say, I only want you to search papers for the last 60 or the last 90 days. So if you haven't done a particular search for a while, and you say, oh, if I do this search again, I'm going to get everything in the whole database. I don't, you know, and I don't know, I can limit it by date range, but I don't know which back issues you added. You know, you might have added some from the 1860s, some the 1890s, and some from the 1920s. Just do only what you added in the last 30, 60, or 90 days. That's a terrific way, and we like to see you when you'll be there every month and do at least one search. And that'll keep you current, help you search only the new stuff, so to speak, and you'll be in business. It's absolutely amazing. But we're on Google Circles, we're on Facebook, we have our blog, we have our newsletter, so you can be informed and get this list as a spreadsheet. Bingo, it'll just keep pouring out to you in the mail. And you can ask at any time, click on the title list and say, okay, give me just what you have for Maine, and you're going to see it's hundreds of titles for these various states, way more than are on other sites. And there are terrific sites out there, and they have newspapers we don't have. We get it, so you'll have to use some other sites sometimes. But Genealogy Bank has more newspapers than anyone, and we have a lot of fun with it. And you can write us, and we'll actually answer. We sometimes get buried after a webinar like this, but you will get an answer.
Good. Bobby and others are asking this, who are already current members. Can they extend their existing subscription using this promotion?
You sure can. Just call the telephone number that's on the screen, it's on the promotion, and tell them, and you see that little code number to the side, the promo code, just give them that 1203 web, and that will tell them that it's the webinar, and you're good to go with that code. Okay. And tell them you want to extend your membership with a special price, because it's a terrific price. You can always get 2 years or whatever you want to do.
Okay, I found it here on if you go to genealogybank.com/webinar, here's that code that Tom was mentioning right down there, and the phone number also. Okay, excellent. Well, Tom, let's do this really quickly. I just want to let people know that the recording of this will be available up in our archives, so you can certainly go back and rewatch it or invite your friends or societies to view it. And then our next webinar is this Friday with Lisa Alzo. Digital writing tools for genealogists. Please arrive at least 15 to 20 minutes early to ensure your virtual seat. And then if you're wondering about making the transition from hobbyist to genealogy professional, we'll have 2 professionals with us next Wednesday John Kitzmiller and Claire Bryson Banks to talk to you about that. April 11th, Genealogy on the Go. Malcolm Green, the developer of the Families app, will be with us to talk to you about using Families on your Android iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad, or even on my brand new tablet, which I just love. 2 more coming up, Mary Dugan, Researching Your Scottish Ancestors, and Megan Smoleniak with Finding the Living. So sign up for one or for all of those today, and then we'll send you the typical reminder email messages. Door prizes. For those of you that are still here, you are eligible, and thanks to Tom and to genealogybank.com. The first door prizes that we'll have today are 1-year subscriptions to the use of genealogybank.com. And let's see. Oh, I didn't update this. Hey, let me watch this, guys. I'm going to go in here to my PowerPoint and change this really quickly. Okay, now it looks good. And so there's your link. You've got that written down, and I'll go in and find who our first winner is. We have Jonathan Faulkner of Florida. Congratulations to you. Just wait just a second. I'm just writing down your name. So for the winners, just check your email. We'll communicate the delivery of these door prizes that way. So congratulations to Jonathan. And then we have Lona Sois. I think you know who you are, so congratulations to both of you. Have 1-year subscription to genealogybank.com. Thanks, Tom. Thank your guys there at Newsbank for that. Yes, next we'll have a copy of the Watch Jeff Live Adding an Obituary CD. This was one I did several months ago about showing you how to enter printed obituaries and even an online obituary from genealogybank.com. So this will give you the other inside tips on getting the most of these obituaries and actually doing the data entry, adding the sources, and other type of things. Introductory price there, price with today's coupon code that I'll give you in just a couple of moments. And our winner for this, we have Lynn Guidetti. So congratulations to you. There we go. And what else do we have? Oh, Hey America, Your Roots Are Showing. This is the very first time I've ever publicly talked about this by Megan Smoleniak. I hear it's a wonderful book. I haven't gone through it yet. I'm anxious to do it. Just published, 288 pages. She's our webinar speaker next month. And there's your pricing. It's very good pricing. Check that out there in our store. And actually, let me throw these links in your control panel so you just have a one click of a link there. Okay, so our winner for this, hold on just a moment. We have Sue Wakeman of Michigan. So congratulations to Sue. And of course, all of you are winners because of our 10% off coupon code that we'll give to you as a gift. Use this code. Now, Tom, I don't know if, we didn't talk about this, but have you ever used your name as a coupon code before?
No, I got to say that's a first.
Okay, add that to your repertoire. So Kemp, you could K-E-M-P, just use that at checkout. In our online store, good for anything. Our software, training videos, CDs, even the FlipPal mobile scanner, if you've been thinking about that, this would be a good time to use it. And other good stuff up there. Valid through Monday, April 2nd. I think that's all that I have to say here. So write that down, Kemp. Okay, so Tom, we've got some more questions that people have been typing in as we've gone along. Get to as many of these as we can, but I hope to see all of you this coming Friday with Lisa Alzo. And Tom, do you have some time now just to go through some other questions?
You bet. I'll stay as long as people like.
Okay. And Tom, let me know if at any time you want me to switch control of the computer over to you. I'll just make that switch
sure.
Easily. Mm-hmm. Okay. What about a question from Patrish? Genealogy Bank, is it offered through public libraries? Is there an individual subscription versus an institutional subscription?
Yeah, yes. We've been talking about Genealogy Bank, which is the one for consumers.
Okay.
has about 6,000 newspapers. There is one with a very similar sounding name. It's also a service offered by the company, and it's called America's Genealogy Bank. And it is, probably we should have given it a more distinct, different name because it's a different service, but it operates in many of the same ways, even looks a little bit alike. It has just over, I'd say, about 2,500 newspapers. So you don't get as many newspapers, and sometimes people confuse that and say, oh, I can get everything on Genealogy Bank over at such a library. Well, you get some of the papers, but not all of them. And it just involves, we're able to get license agreements with the newspapers for certain markets.
Okay.
And so we have them for all the newspapers in the public, individual market, but not necessarily to libraries. And so that just is a nuance of the permissions that we have. We work very closely with the newspapers.
Okay, thank you. A question from Patty. With so many different spellings of names, is it possible either now or in the future for Genealogy Bank to make the search easier with possible Soundex searching? Or do you have any tips about using variations?
Yeah. For right now, just like when you're looking through a card file index or some sort, you do have to just use every variation that you can think of. And you can use the wildcards. You can plug in an asterisk or some sort to truncate or to try and eliminate a vowel. We are looking at all types of abilities, all possibilities using Soundex, new hybrid Soundex approaches. And it's easy when you're applying it, say, against a census, where the census is just a list of names. And so then all you're searching is against a controlled set of data. We're searching names, but when you're searching across newspapers and every word in a newspaper, Soundex isn't going to be the helpful thing that you think it is, because it's going to produce everything that sounds like Kemp or Jorgensen or Hickenlooper or whatever the name, and that could involve a lot of words, way beyond just the surnames. So we're looking at it. We're looking at it nonstop. We're looking at ways. I find that the secret is analyze the person you're looking for. What is the most unique word in the person's name? Maybe it's the first name. And so maybe you're looking for, give me everybody who died last year whose first name was Maurice. And then you say, okay, that doesn't come up too often, or not as often as Tom or John or some other name. And so you might find that is a killer way to do it. I've also found, just give me the obituaries that occurred in a specific town, because it's a very small town. We have a lot of rural papers as well as big city papers. And so that would be a way. So you're trying to say, how can I cut through so I get as few hits as possible? And that's what you're asking it from the point of view of multiple spellings of a surname. But you might find if your problem is, say, a German name, and you're saying, gee, they kept adding F's and L's and different things, chances are they did know how to spell the person's first name. They did spell it Friedrich, or they did spell it Hans or something. And that usually works. And so you might be able to short-circuit it using that way. I find that's a great tip, by the way, for a census index, that you search on the unique first name rather than the last name if you're not finding them.
Okay, very good. So Perk is asking a question, are there newspapers available in Southern Ontario? So if I understand correctly, Tom, it's still currently just U.S., but
That's
if they wanted to find it, do you mind if I'm going to switch over to your website here on my computer,
Okay.
bank.com, and from my screen here, this is how I would approach it, I think, and tell me if you have any other better suggestions. You could just go down to right here where it says newspaper titles.
Yes.
And then here's where you would, select by the state. So let's go to Minnesota. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but we still have people just asking about this. And then they're listed here in alphabetical order by the title of the newspaper. Is it possible, can you get a list of, or sort this by the city or the town? Or is it just the title?
What you want to do is come back up. You can do one of two things. You can get the list as a sortable spreadsheet and sort it any way you like. But if you came back in to go back up to Genealogy Bank itself.
Okay.
Yeah. Now click on the historical newspapers, that little section.
Okay. Here we go.
Now notice the states, and so click on your Minnesota again in the example you gave.
So here's Minnesota.
And then you get the names of the towns.
I like that.
And you might say, oh, I just want to do St. Paul newspaper. So you could actually just check St. Paul.
Okay.
So you could check it, and that means you'll search just those newspapers, or click on it again the way you did. Or you can see, here's exactly the papers you have.
Excellent.
You'll see the time spread is 1849 to 1923, and you can dig in and see for each paper.
Okay.
So that's an approach you can take as well.
Very good.
Now, you asked about Southern Ontario. Interesting question. I have a lot of family in Ontario and Canada in general. And you will find that the newspapers along the border were heavy into reporting just the way they would report things across the state or in neighboring states. They wanted to sell papers in Canada. And the people in Minnesota or Michigan or Maine, New Hampshire, they wanted to know about their neighbors. And so they would report the births, marriages, and deaths that occurred just across the border in the neighboring towns, just like they would report marriages on the neighboring towns of a town in Kansas or a town in Texas.
Yep.
So very, very common.
Oh, good.
Or you get the one like the ones in New York City that were reporting on the events that happened back in Ireland. So every month we're going to be adding more papers. You never know what tomorrow will bring.
Okay, we have a success story real fast from Carrie. Carrie went to your site, entered the family name of Earl and the keyword of obituary, and found an obit that he hadn't seen on one of his family members before. So thanks for the tip. Well, congratulations, Carrie. This is fun.
Terrific.
Michelle is asking, if you want to use multiple keywords in the search, do you separate those words with commas or semicolons, or just spaces okay?
All of the above.
Okay.
And but practice with it. You never know how it's going to affect it, if it's going to zero in on it. I've always thought that you're supposed to put in a comma, but turns out if you don't, it works just the same.
Oh, really?
And so my first answer would be put in a comma, but I've seen that if you didn't put in the commas, it still searches. So both work.
Okay. Dorothy says,
and remember,
go ahead.
everything you put, if you put in 5 extra words, all 5 of those have to be in the article, or you will not get a hit. It will not bring you back everything that had just one of those words. Anything you type into the search box has to be in the final article.
Okay.
So they're not going to find, if I typed in, gee, he lived in Stamford, he lived in Orlando, and he lived in Utica, New York, and I put in Utica, Stamford, and Orlando, unless the article used all 3 cities, you're going to get 0 hits.
Okay.
Is there any, ask for it, because that's what you'll get.
Yeah. Is there any parameter you could use, like or? You know, type in Stanford or?
Yes, actually, you're right. Yes, using the Boolean things, you can.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, you're correct. I should have said that.
Well, I was just thinking out loud and offering a suggestion, but
yeah.
I guess if you can do that, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you use the word or, then you're fine.
Huh. Wow. Dorothy is asking, is there any way to attempt to find the paper if you have a clipping but nothing to tell you the publication or date? Is there any method to find that?
I'll tell you that is such a common question that librarians get, having spent 50 years as a librarian. And you would be amazed how you show a librarian a clipping, they know exactly what paper it is just by the look of it.
I love it.
And, yeah, it's funny. And we would often take the clipping first to other people on the staff and say, do you recognize this? Oh, yeah, that's the Des Moines one, or oh, yeah, that's the Brooklyn one, or whatever. And because people lived a lot of places. But the answer is, you want to be careful what you're looking for. If you're not if you're saying it, hey, you guys say you have the Kansas City Star, I've got a clipping that's from the Kansas City Star. How come I'm not finding it? The answer is don't clutter it up with asking for a lot of words. My experience, look for the weirdest word in the article and search for that word. Also look at the article and say, was there any word that got mangled? Were the tops of the font letters cut off? Was something, a big blotch on it? And so don't search on those words. You can read those words just because your eye is filling in what the text is, but figure out what might the computer OCR be missing. And I would look for those. Make sure you do not limit by a date because you could be wrong. And I would look for as many of the patterns of a word as possible, not necessarily the headline and the obvious word, because if you found it with the obvious ones, you wouldn't be asking the question. And so look for words deep into the article, and you're very usual, in my experience, you will find it.
Good. I personally had success with that, where I had a clipping, and so I just took a unique phrase in the obituary, and I typed it into your keyword search, and it found it. It was back in Connecticut or something. I was amazed, but it's a very good strategy. We have a copyright question from Raymond. What do I have to do to use a newspaper article in whole or in part in a book or a magazine article? Are they copyrighted?
Yes, and they are. And all of the images are copyrighted, and the newspapers have copyrights as well. So your best rule of thumb before you publish it in a book, if you're putting it in your own you put it in the legacy program and you print out a family history and you give one to your mom and you give one to your kids, no problem. That's called fair use, personal use. If you decide to sell it to the 20 of your closest relatives, then that's a little bit further up the food chain, and that's distribution. And so what you want to do is double check, because while we may be very comfortable with it, we Genealogy Bank, the newspaper might not be. And so we have people who do nothing but answer copyright questions. And so you write us, put copyright in the header, and they'll get it over to that person, and they'll research, was there some copyright asserted by that newspaper that might not be an issue for a different newspaper. Okay. So they'll figure out all those things, and they'll let you know.
Okay, very good. Question from Karen and a couple others. Genealogy Bank versus Newsbank. What's the difference?
One is the name of a product. The product, the service, the thing you join is Genealogy Bank. The company that owns it is Newsbank, so it's the same place.
Okay, very good. A question from Anne. What print capabilities are available? Can you print the articles? Can you copy and paste the articles? What features are available for that?
It's unlimited. You can do all of the above. Sometimes, if you're not experienced as to what to do, it may not be obvious, but just anything you're looking at on your screen, you can do print screen. If you're using a photo editor, I use Picasa, free with Google, and you just click print screen. It automatically comes up in Picasa. It lets you crop it, and you say, well, gee, I only want the article. I don't want everything around it. I only want that photograph or just that part of the obituary, that one paragraph. And you can easily cut and paste. You can easily manipulate it, shade it, lighten, darken, enlarge, whatever you want to do, and tuck it right in just as if you had any other photograph and you want to put it right in your legacy program. Bingo. You put it right in, and there's, if you may not have a photograph of your ancestor, but now you have the obituary or the marriage announcement or the article about him right in there as if it was a photograph and document. It's very handy, very nifty, very easy to do, and you can store it right in your computer, find it easily.
Okay, thank you. A question from Sandy, referring to the Social Security Death Index, which is also part of genealogybank.com. Does your index there, for the people that have died in the last 10 years, does it show the Social Security number, or are they deleted like they are on other sites now?
Yeah, as a privacy concern, we did take the Social Security number off.
Okay.
For all of them. We didn't do it for just some of the records.
Okay.
We just did a little analysis, interestingly enough, about all the sites that have, you can see that on the blog that we write, and I was fascinated. I always thought every Social Security Death Index site was identical. They're not. And we update every week. There's one other site that updates every week, but the other sites, they don't update that often. And so you might look at the article that sort of talks about how many million fewer records there are on some sites than others. But the other thing that fascinated me was how much information you get. Our site is now the only one that includes, if you contact the Social Security Administration and you say, I'm sorry to tell you, but so-and-so has died, and they say, okay. They don't just take your word for it because you called them up on the phone and told them. They're going to say, well, who is this? Why are you? And maybe you went to the Social Security office with the check that was just mailed you and they said, my grandfather's passed away and I'm the grandson and here's the obituary or here's his death certificate or something. And so if you're standing there and you're a family member, then they have two categories. And I am going to make sure I'm giving you the right category. And if it's a person standing there in front of them and they say, yep, that's right, I believe you, he died, and I see the obituary, etc. And bear with me one second. I'm just waiting for this to click through. Da-dum-bump. At any rate, this, if you're standing there and you show them the death certificate and they see an actual government document, they add a notation to the person's file in their office that the record was proven. And if it was not, if it was just you're standing there and they get the family information, oh, bummer. I'm just doing a mental blank now on what the other words. There's two. Okay. It's confirmed and proven. And so they confirmed that he died. You're standing there, and they got the information from a member of the family. And if they saw an actual death certificate, then they put proven. We're the only one that got that information from the Social Security information and added it to it and have it in the Social Security Death Index. Oh, really? So if you look at the index citations, and all of a sudden you see a little verified, that's the word, verified and proven. Okay. That tells you the level of accuracy and that it isn't just the funeral home saying, oh, by the way, he died, you know. Yeah. And so you have a little bit more of a level of proof. And so I think that's a handy thing to know. Not all Social Security Death Index sites are the same. Very good. That was a shock to me. I was surprised. Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed your articles and comparisons on that lately in your social media sites. Here's a comment, and I accidentally deleted it, but I want to mention it to you anyways, or kind of a comment and question. This person was saying that they've heard that modern obituaries or more obituaries that are being published today are omitting the names of the living family members due to privacy issues. Are you seeing that in your travels and your research? Is that becoming more of a trend to leave that out? I can understand why that might happen, but I've never seen that to be the case. Okay. Because if anything, it's just the opposite. I'm not finding anyone shying away from doing that. I know people are conscious of a lot of things, but I'm seeing it right down to the names of grandchildren, great-grandchildren, contact information. I'm seeing a great deal of detail. And I'll keep an antenna up just to see. Okay. But I've had no indication of that, and I'm still seeing it very common for people to have great detail. Very good. Question from Carol. Do you offer ethnic newspapers for various cities? Yeah, that's a terrific question. We actually do. If you flip back, Jeff, to the home page, you'll see that we can go all the way down the bottom. and you'll see that we've made it very easy to find two of them. See those green buckets there? So you can click on the African American or the Irish American and just click on either one. Now you notice that search box right in there. This one allows you to search only the Irish American newspapers, or if you clicked on the other one, you could search only the African American newspapers. And we had people that asked for that and said, well, can I narrow it down to just the ethnic newspapers? And we're going to put them up there because we have large collections of French American newspapers, German American newspapers, Hispanic American newspapers. We have the largest collection of African American, Hispanic, Irish American, etc., collections of online newspapers of anyone, anywhere. And so that's quite special. And so you could search these. I see you need to be logged in there, Jeff, probably.
Yeah, I don't remember that stuff right now, but I'm anxious to go and look at this now.
And pretty handy. It's a nice way to short-circuit it. And don't forget, just a sidebar tip, you're getting the entire paper. So it may be that you want to help the kids with their junior high, high school, college homework. And maybe the assignment is, let me look at this event in the Civil War from an experience of an Irish American newspaper, the experience of an African American newspaper. That's a killer opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's also a great way, if you've got obscure towns, you can look up those towns in an Irish newspaper. They'll likely have spelled it correctly and find all the other people associated with that town. That might be a terrific way for you to find out what happened to your family member, track down the daughter that got married.
Yeah.
And she had a very distinctive first name. And you're just taking a long shot, seeing if you can find her. So you search on the first name with the name of the county or some such.
Oh, good tip.
All types of angles that you can use.
Right. Well, let's go to a question from Mary. How is Tom defining a record when they are being added? So is when you're mentioning how many records are being added each day and month, is that a single page, a complete issue, or something else?
Yeah, it's the chunk of the paper. Now, if they say the obituary chunk will be one record, that could have been 50 people died if it's a large city newspaper, or it could be 7 people that died. So, but it's one article, so to speak. Now, if you get a newspaper article and says continued on page 7, and so when you click just above the picture that you're looking at in your search results, you've opened up the article and it says, oh, I have to go to the next page. If you click on the PDF icon, it flips it into PDF view, PDF Adobe view. It automatically pulls the continued articles into your PDF. So it's a faster way than going to page 7 and finding it. You just click on the PDF view and then just scroll down to the continuation.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
It's sort of 2 answers to 1. But basically speaking, a record that we add represents an article or a section of the paper. Sometimes if these articles are really tiny, they may call it an article about something, but it's really 4 or 5 articles stuck together. Okay. So it's not an exact count. It roughly works out to 1 article. But if you wanted to count the number of obituaries, meaning the number of obituary articles about a specific person, 1 article might be good for 7, 10, 14 people who passed away. So it's not a 1-for-1.
Okay. Oh, good. And by the way, over 1,400 of you have registered for today's webinar from all around the world. So it's so nice to have all of them here today. Tom, we have a question from Tom. He's asking, my ancestor was Louis Mall, and when he searches, he gets 5 million hits because a newspaper reads it as the St. Louis Mall. Is there any way to get around that?
Well, again, you want to play with the subject headings or something else distinctive in the person's name. I have found another interesting way to do it. Do not search for the person by name in the name boxes, but put the person's name in the other search on other terms, and then put Louis Mall in quotes. Chances are the name of the mall wasn't the Louis Mall, or something popular like that, and that it actually is going to get your person. Now, if the article is about Lewis M. Mall or Lewis John Mall, you'll miss him. But that's a great way, I think, in my experience, to narrow it down or associate it with another term, Lewis Mall and Stanford, or a distinctive word that would help you cut through it. If you find that the mall, that's going to be a modern term, of course. It's not going to probably be in the historical papers, and you might get said somebody was mauled by the horse riding through, but I guess that's not spelled the same. But anyway, sounds like. And, so you really have to play with it. But in my experience, putting it in quotes in the other search terms box is probably the way you want to go.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I like that. Tom, let's end with your thoughts about Kim's comment here. Kim writes, I've read that you should write your own obituary as a genealogist and include what you would want your descendants to have. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think you should. I think that's a terrific idea. And then, you know, the wonderful thing, write your story. Write your biography. And it could be a work in progress, and put it on your Facebook page or somewhere where your kids will find it. My parents have done their obituaries just so they could keep everything straight. They were wonderful people, but no one special. They're still with us, and every time I'm down in Florida, I look at those 3.5-inch floppies, and I say, "That's really great. I'm not going to be able to open that thing and read it. You've got to. You still have the file. Can we recreate this? Can we talk it through?" They, of course, it's awkward. They don't want to talk about it, and yet they did feel motivated to write this, but they put it in a format clearly labeled. My mom's laid things out. You know, she's been so prepared, but I can't open that. And I'm just hoping I can take it to a Kinko's or somebody that'll still have the old equipment and say, yeah, we can do that. But I would say do it. I would say put it online. You can write a blog that you can make private, that you can give somebody the keys to and the passwords to that can open it up and see it. I think the nicest thing you could do would be to write an essay about what you've learned in your life and break it off into little chunks. And there is a site called scribd.com, SCRIBD.com. And so don't write it as an obituary because you don't want to look odd and put up something about it after you died. But you could put up your biography. You could tuck it in there with the biographies of the grandparents and everybody else. And so here's biographies of 10 people in the family. So you don't say, well, gee, it looks kind of self-serving if I do my own. Put up 10 people, and you're just one of them. And put a preamble, an introduction. I wanted the rest of the family to know what I've learned about the lives of so-and-so, and including my own life, and I've included it here. And you can chunk out a little section in there that really walks and talks and looks like an obituary, and just sort of say, and if I were writing my obituary, it might sound something like this. Boom, there it is.
I like it.
So you can make it soften it a little so you don't look awkward or uncomfortable, and yet you've communicated and given the information. I decided that if I was going to pass down this information to the kids, I've got to put it in a format that they're using, Facebook and that sort of thing. So I've really gotten into that. And I put up all the family photographs there. So you want to populate it in formats and on multiple sites so that they're findable. You put family tree on New Family Search, you put it on Ancestry, you put it on Genie, you put it on every source you can. And I very much encourage people, you can take your legacy information, print it out in a report format, make sure you do not include the living people, and you print it as a report. And they have the various formats, check the boxes, get them, practice with it, print it out as an Adobe PDF, and then upload that to scribd, SCRIBD.com. The wonderful thing is, and that's free, once it's up there, it's 100% searchable by Google, Bing, and all the search engines. I am hearing from genealogists constantly, people who are not genealogists, but who, for one brief weekend, thought they would look into the family tree. And so if you searched on Kemp and Ireland and all this, bingo, up comes that book I put on Scribed. And I literally heard from cousins overseas who didn't know anything about Family Search or Ancestry or any of the common sites where we could put a family tree, and they found me. And tomorrow, if I change the information and say, oh, now that I've got that information from the cousin over here and this document I just got in the mail from over there, I have a new conclusion or additional facts about the family, I print off a new Adobe, I upload it to Scribe, it pops it right in and covers over the one you sent up before and keeps all the comments, footnotes, and links that people created to it. So nothing is lost. It allows you to update it as many times as you want, and it's totally free, and best part, totally searchable. And anybody can download your book that you created from Legacy and have it. I find that invaluable. So much so that I've got 85,000 or so names in my Legacy program. And I say, well, gee, I'm never going to finish and publish the book. So I've been taking off little chunks of the family and publishing just those. And I really chunked it out based on some of the strategies I was giving you. I'm picking the most unusual surnames in the family, or the most unusual first names, or the most unusual cities that they lived in. Because I'm figuring if I'm looking for that and I'm not a genealogist, I want to cut through as much of the clutter as possible so that they can find me. And I've heard from all kinds of cousins that never, ever, ever would have come to a genealogy conference or traveled in genealogy online sites, but yet they were able to find this material. So I gave you several tips in there beyond just writing your own obituary. But definitely do it. Definitely write your journal, your biography, as much of it as you want to. It could be 1 page, 3 pages, or book length.
Tom, I could just sit and just listen to you all day long. You're a joy. You're a true pleasure. It's been really nice. So Scribe, if I got it right, it's scribd.com, right? Scribed.com.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like you're looking at a scribe from Old England without the E.
Yeah, that's really neat. Well, thank you. Thanks to Tom Kemp. Thanks for all of you around the world. You, too, are a joy to be a part of my day here, wherever and whenever you are. Thanks for making this webinar part of your day. And remember that life is short. Do genealogy first. Bye-bye.